I'm a firm believer, the better you understand people, the better communicator you're going to be. And the better communicator you're going to be, the better your messaging is, marketing is, but more importantly, the better relationships you have in your life. And yes, this means relationships with anyone and everyone in your life, your kids, parents, friends, coworkers, employees, spouses, whatever it may be. But most importantly, your audience. The more you understand how humans process information, how people think, how people want to be heard and understood, the better your messaging, marketing, and communication is going to be. And that's exactly what we're diving into in this episode. So keep on listening. Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. Today, we have a new episode, obviously. It's a topic that I haven't really talked much about. It's actually a topic that I've been learning a lot about, whether I wanted to or not, over the past year. The universe has basically been like, here you go, learn this. And we're going to learn through giving you challenges and see if you pay attention. And I have been paying attention. And a lot of these things I've kind of known. And I want to go over them today because I've understood them on deeper levels than I have in the past, but there's a lot of connection between these concepts we're going to go over today, between life, business, marketing, and messaging. And that's what I'm starting to realize over, especially the last couple months, is a lot of what I teach you when it comes to messaging, communication are concepts. I think they're universal concepts that can be applied to different areas of your life. I like to use a lot of our messaging concepts and teach you how to communicate with kids, your kids a little bit better, your spouse a little bit better, because humans are humans, people are people. And the way in which they process information, hear information is generally all the same. The way we process our past, the way we respond to traumas, the way we respond to triggers, more or less, as humans, is generally the same. Like there's different attachment styles, but there's like 4 of them that we know of, right? And everything that you do or go through in life, yes, you have your own individual path, you have your own individual experiences, you have your own individual triggers, you have your own individual egos. But as far as human condition goes, those things don't vary very much, meaning that there's a reason why psychologists or therapists and stuff can work with various people depending on different issues, because the way in which realities are formed, thoughts are formed, emotions are formed are generally the same. The things that differ are just the experiences that you go through in life. And what I've come to realize is when you have a better understanding of how humans process information, how people work, how people think, how emotions are formed, how realities are formed, how thoughts are formed, how people respond to certain things, you just become a better marketer. And it's not because you're like, I'm going to use this tricky language and manipulate someone. It's like, no, you're taking your information, you're taking your skills, you're taking your knowledge, and you're just reformatting how you say it, how you communicate it, so it lands more effectively with the right type of people. And that's the thing you have to understand is, even if I say the most effective words in the world, but you don't need what I'm selling, it's not really going to matter to you because it's not relatable to you. And so what I've come to realize is, like, working with so many different students, is that the people that don't understand people and are very trapped in their own awareness, very trapped in their own perspective, actually make some of the worst marketers. And they make the worst marketers because they literally can't see how to communicate anything differently, because they have a really hard time understanding how people process information. They have a really hard time understanding that the way they see the world is just one of a million ways or a billion ways or 7.2 billion ways that the world is seen. Because every single individual person has a different perspective, a different version of reality, different thoughts, different emotions that's created by your mind. And if you're not careful, those thoughts and those emotions, or even if you are careful, will create the reality and the experience that you have in the world. And when you truly understand that, your communication needs to tap into your audience's reality, when you get that to the core and you understand that they see things differently than you, they have different experiences and levels of awareness than you. And when you can truly get out of your perspective, your awareness, and you start to tap into theirs, it becomes a very, very powerful place to be. And again, this is true when you're communicating with your kids. It communicates with your spouse, your friends, parents, whatever it may be. When you truly understand and get this, you become more self-aware of your own triggers, your own ego, your own thoughts, your own destructive thinking, limiting beliefs, and all that stuff. And you become more aware of it. Guess what starts to happen to the people you communicate with? You get deeper, better, more efficient, effective communication. Like I always use the example of having your kid clean their room. Like if I wanted my son to go clean his room and I operate from my perspective, which is I'm busy, I'm tired, I got a million and a half things to do today. I can't take the time to like explain to him why he needs to clean his room. And I just yell, hey, go clean your room and do it now because I'm your dad. Well, that's purely out of my own needs, my own desires, my own wants, my own ego. And it's probably not going to land as well as taking a minute and saying, what is he doing? Where are his emotions? Where is his focus? Where is his energy? What's his experience in life like right now? Because if I take the time to do that, which by the way, guys, could take 3 seconds, it totally can alter the way in which I communicate to him. It totally changes how I respond, how I ask, how I explain, and I'm way more likely to avoid his own triggers, to avoid any fights, to avoid any arguments, to have more effective, deeper communication, which ultimately leads to more connection, more flow, smoother energy, and a better environment for the family. And so if I look at that and go, okay, cool, he's in the middle of playing Legos right now. He's probably in the middle of a project. I remember when I was a kid and I was in the middle of a project, all I wanted to do was finish the dang thing. And so maybe he's going to be in the same state of mind. So if I tell him to go clean his room, he's probably going to be a little irritated. So what if I just asked him, what are you working on? How much more time do you need? And he might say, I'm in the middle of this. I need 5 more minutes. I'm like, okay, if we set a timer for 5 minutes, will you clean your room after that? Yep. Okay. Got it. So much smoother, so much easier, just more effective communication. And I truly believe the more you understand people, the better marketer, communicator, and messaging you'll have. So what I wanted to do is I actually wanted to go through 5 different ways in which people show up, 5 concepts that you want to take into consideration when crafting messaging, when crafting marketing, when crafting and writing copy, and just communication in general. And number 1 is that you have to understand that our minds, the way that the subconscious works for the most part, is generally going to be relatively selfish. It's survival mechanism of, I need this, I understand this, or I don't like that, I don't like this. Here's what I need, here's what I want, here's what's interesting to me. And a lot of those times, those are subconsciously driven. So when your audience is seeing an ad, for example, their mind is asking those questions. Is this relevant to me? Is this going to benefit us? Does this help take care of a problem for us? And this is why I push problems so hard, is because those are one of the things that the mind is looking for, because the mind is selfish. The mind doesn't want to have a hard time. It doesn't want struggle. It's looking for ease. It's looking to survive. So when we talk about benefits or we talk about ending of problems, it's 10 times more effective than talking about features or talking about whatever, right? So what we want to do is remember that our mind is generally going to want to be selfish. This also, you have to take into consideration, not only does this how does it show up for your audience, but how does it show up for you? When you create content, when you create messaging, Are you trying to look really smart and go too deep on content because you want to look smart, because you want the attention to be on you? That's selfish. There's nothing wrong with desiring and wanting the attention to be on you. But if you let it control the way in which you communicate, guess what? You'll never have the attention on you because it's all about you and it's not about your audience. So again, I'm not saying that the desire to want attention is bad, although I would explore that if I were you. I'm not saying it's bad, but I'm saying if you can't write or communicate outside of that, that's going to hurt your business. That's going to hurt your ads. It's going to hurt your content. So we have to understand the mind is naturally selfish. Then it's going to want to survive. And you have to be able to stop that when you go and write. So it means get out, like, what am I really writing here for? Am I really writing to make the audience member feel heard? Or am I writing because I want to talk about how good my solution is? Am I writing right now or communicating because I want to be right? Or am I communicating because I really just want to display a flaw in a belief that they may have? So you really have to question the intention behind your writing, your marketing, your communication to see, am I trying to convince people? Is there some sort of selfish motive I have that I'm trying to gain from this? Like, obviously if you're trying to get leads and stuff, that's fine. There's nothing selfish, and that's part of just a business. You need leads, right? But it's like, how are you trying to get the leads? Are you writing to talk about how your solution is better than everyone else? Are you pushing everyone else down? Are you trying to stand on someone else's shoulders? Are you trying to, again, sound really smart and going too deep? Or are you trying to make them feel heard? Are you trying to add value in a different way? So you have to really pull yourself out of that, tap into and understand the mind is a little bit selfish. So when you talk about their problems, their experiences, you validate them, you boost their ego or speak to the benefits they want. It's a lot more effective when you do that. And then especially when you're able to have this self-awareness to speak outside of your own selfish behavior and thinking. Number 2 is ego. And the way I like to describe ego or your tonal is it's that voice inside of your head. It's what you think is you, but is not actually you. The way I look at it, try to, as best as I can, is that it's its own separate entity outside of me and my soul. And what I mean by this is it also is the thing that makes you want to be selfish. It is the thing that tells you this is what we want. This is what's going to keep you safe. This is the thing that may talk you out of taking a risk. It's the thing that tells you that person is offensive. That person is triggering. That person is whatever, dangerous. That's the ego sitting there telling you what to think. And a lot of the time it happens in the form of automation. These are automatic thoughts. Now, the thing you have to remember about this is that your audience also has one. We all have it as part of the human experience. And the number one way that the ego shows up, at least for me, is a desire and a want to be right. This means not listening to other people's perspective, thinking my perspective is always best. My way or the highway, those are different ways in which the ego can show up in the form of wanting to be right. But if you know this, and you know that the ego is showing up because it wants to be right, or it wants to keep you safe, or whatever it may be, that's where, and your audience is doing it, that's where messaging can become really effective. Because you start to go and how is the ego going to show up for my audience? Am I being too aggressive? Am I being too offensive? Am I being too whatever? But also, if you know that the ego wants to be right, if you know the ego wants to keep them safe, this is where without statements come in and are really powerful. So if you're looking and trying to write and communicate to your audience, and okay, their ego is going to try to make them feel safe. It's going to try to make them feel heard. It's going to make them try to be right. You can say things like, here's how to do X, Y, and Z without, and you put the dangerous thing they don't want to do, like without spending a lot of money on ads, right? Or without having to leave your job. Here's how to have a deeper relationship with your spouse without having difficult conversations, right? The ego is saying, I can't have a hard conversation. I don't want to have a hard conversation. I can't do this. That's all ego. keeping you safe, keeping you comfortable. So without statements are really, really powerful statements when trying to communicate with someone. Even if I wanted to, like, I don't know, if I would just make something up here, if I wanted to go to a restaurant, there's a restaurant I really, really wanted to try, and I knew my wife didn't really want to try it or something like that, and I knew she's gluten-free, I could say, hey, we can go to this restaurant. And I knew maybe she was like worried that we're spending too much money. I could say, we can just go and try this restaurant. And it's really nice because they have a gluten-free menu. So we don't have to, we can go without having to worry about you getting sick, and the price is really low. So we can also go without the worry of like spending too much money. Right. So if I'm not using those without statements, the conversation becomes a lot harder. Like, I really want to go try this. And they do have a gluten-free menu and the prices aren't too bad. But when you add the without and the thing they really want to avoid, it just adds more power to it without you getting sick, without us overextending ourselves or paying too much money or whatever it may be. So we have to understand and look at, like, okay, how is ego playing into even my content? Like, does this, again, it goes back to the mind is naturally selfish. Mind is naturally selfish because of the ego. So am I writing because I have an insecurity? Am I creating this piece of content because I want to look smart? Am I writing this piece of content because of, some sort of past trauma or trigger that I have, or I don't know, whatever it may be, right? So we have mind naturally selfish, and we also have ego. Number 3 is humans and people just naturally want to avoid hard times. This could show up in the form of like hard conversations. This could show up in the form of not wanting to take risks. This is also why the without statements are really powerful. So if you say, hey, I'm going to show you how to create a really high converting webinar without spending a lot of money on ads, the without and whatever follows it, you always want to put the hard thing in there. So if you want someone to opt in for something or register for something or do something or get on board with something, using the without statement and including the thing they want to avoid or including the thing that is hard is going to make them more likely to do it. So if I said you can build a big audience without having to post every day, or you can build a big audience and create content without having to be on camera. Those are all really great statements that help people realize, oh, I can avoid this hard thing that I don't want to do. But understanding people has a really, really big effect on everything in your life, because it could also lead to having hard conversations. And the reason why this is really important is when you know that people want to avoid things that are hard, there's usually depth, richness, and beauty on the other side of doing hard things. And what you have to understand is that's what we can bring our audience, is when you can help your audience get past doing hard things, you bring them to richness, beauty, and depth. But when you also recognize the hard things is what brings that, and you have the self-awareness inside of you to recognize that and to recognize, oh, I'm avoiding this hard thing, it allows you to now know what needs to be addressed, whether that's a hard conversation with a spouse, kid, boss, coworker, employee, parent. It allows you to become aware of, like, I'm avoiding this thing. It's hard. And to know that there's richness and depth on the other side. This is where the most beautiful relationships are formed, is being able to know and navigate those really hard conversations. From a marketing perspective, it also means this with your students. Sometimes when people come into the program, avoiding hard conversations leads to them not finishing the program and having a great experience. Setting those expectations in the right place. Like, sometimes when people come to the messaging program, I have to tell them, like, this is going to be tough. Like, this is going to take some time. This is going to take some real effort and energy. And some people might be like, well, I can't say that to people. I don't want them to like think they have to have a hard time and And it's like, well, then you're setting the wrong expectation when people come to your program, and that's going to leave them in an even worse spot. When this comes to marketing, there's 3 triggers that I like to pay attention to where people like to avoid hard things. People want things fast and quick. They don't want to have to put in a lot of time. They don't want to have to put in a lot of energy. So time and energy. So you can actually use that. If something is going to be done quicker and with less energy, use that in your marketing because it allows them to avoid those hard things. Sometimes they don't want to spend money. So you can talk about another trigger is going to be like, oh, this is less expensive or it's going to save you money. And the other one is like less steps. So if they have the option between getting to result X and there's 5 steps with one option and 3 steps with the other option, which one do you think they're going to choose? Right. So knowing that they're trying to avoid hard things is use that in your marketing when you can. But at the same time, you also have to ask yourself, when they're either a client or in the program or working with you, what are the hard conversations that I'm avoiding to have with this person that can lead to more depth and beauty and connection and all those things. And I like to look at that and ask myself, like, how do we have these hard conversations? How do we navigate these things? And then that even goes back to, okay, well, their mind is not going to be selfish. How do I alter and change my communication for that? How do I avoid, ego triggers and things like that from their end and my perspective? So all of these kind of formulate together to create really effective communication. Number 4 is you have to understand every single human has triggers, and every single human, and this isn't myself included, has some sort of trigger or response where like, I don't like that. This makes me mad. This makes me whatever. And that's what a trigger is. It's an automated response of a negative emotion. Most people don't realize that your triggers are actually beautiful. They're beautiful in the sense that they let you know that there's something there inside of you that can be healed, something inside of you that can be addressed, something inside of you that is living there that doesn't need to live there for your entire life. Trying to think of an example of a trigger of mine that used to be there a lot. Well, one of them was this. I remember when I started my company, started my business, and I was in my late 20s, like 29, 30. And a lot of my friends already had jobs for like 7 years. They'd saved enough money. They were buying their first houses. And then I was there living with my in-laws, basically broke. Not basically broke, I was broke. And anytime that they would talk about their success or their new house that they bought, I would have insecurity triggers. I would feel automatically insecure. It was like a trigger for me. And I didn't realize what triggers were then, but when I recognize that now, that is an opportunity for me to heal that part of my body, my mind, or whatever you want to call it, and have more wholeness to myself, more peace to myself. And so your triggers really are nothing more than indicators of something that can require some attention, some healing, or even just a simple perspective shift. It can require different thinking. And I've noticed that to be true too, is like a lot of times where I get triggered to have automatic emotions, it's because I have some automated thinking or interpretations or meanings that are being attached to whatever scenario just happened. So, when that conversation with my friends happens and they bought the house and this and that, I can ask myself, well, why is that happening? What is the thinking I have around this? And it might be something along the lines of like, well, it means that you're not as worthy. It means you made a wrong choice. It means that there's something wrong with you. And then I can start to ask myself and question that thinking. Is that true? Is that really what's going on? Is that no? Then I can give it a different meaning, a different thought process, a different pattern that start to come up. And I start to heal that part of my body and go, well, where did this come from? Is this something from childhood? And sometimes even with just changing your thinking, you don't even have to go to the depths of figuring out where the trauma is, because it doesn't matter. It's in the past. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. I don't want to speak for everyone. But understanding that people have triggers, including yourself, is really important, because when you write and you speak and you communicate and you create content, if you say something that is triggering to someone, they will have an automated response, and it may not be the response that you want. So that's why always making sure that you discredit people, or not discredit people, but discredit flawed thinking is really important. That's why thought reversal is really important. So if I get out there and I say, how-to content is one of the worst types of content to write, if you want to build an audience, that could be very triggering to someone. They could go like, no, it's not, it's the best way, blah, 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 whatever, right? They could be triggered by it. But if I said how-to content is one of the worst way to build an audience online, look at Gary Vaynerchuk and Brene Brown, and they're not using a lot of how-to content, yet they're soaring. What that does is that all of a sudden it's not as triggering. It's more curiosity driven. It's like, oh yeah, I never realized that before. There's some truth in that. And then it gets them to think differently. It doesn't send a trigger. It sends a new thought process. It sends a new thought or pattern down your audience's mind, leaves them in a much better and more empowering, curiosity-driven state versus a triggering state. But if you also know triggers and you understand how humans are processing information, and you know exactly who you want to attract and who you don't, you can also trigger people to use people's triggers to attract and to push away. So you have to understand triggers aren't always a bad thing. Sometimes triggers are a good thing. So if someone says something and it sparks something in you, that could be a really good trigger. I saw a post on Instagram the other day where someone called those sparks instead of triggers. They call them sparks. And like a spark is an automatic reaction, just like a trigger, but it doesn't leave you in a negative emotion. It leaves you in a positive emotion, right? So I remember a post that we did 6 or 7 years ago where I intentionally was triggering both course creators and videographers at the same time, really intentionally, to push the videographers away and to attract the course creators and to, piss off the videographers. So I did this post that talked about how a videographer will not fix video in your business. And the reason why is because when they show up, they don't understand marketing. They don't understand funnels. They don't know where the content's going to go. They don't understand the messaging. They don't understand the call to action. And so all they're going to do is require more work from you. Because when a videographer shows up, all they're going to do is say, okay, stand here, say these words. You still have to write the script. You have to come up with the content. You have to know where it's going to fit into the funnel. You have to then post it once it's edited. So if a videographer adds more things to your plate, they don't take things away. What you need is the whole point is you need a content director or something like that, who's going to map out the pieces of content, map out the scripts, where it's going to play in the funnel and all that stuff. And that way you as the business owner can just show up and the content director works with the videographer. So I posted this ad and videographers went ballistic. They got triggered by it, which is what I knew was going to happen. So I was intentionally using the triggers to push them away because they are not my ideal audience. But because they were triggered, they were leaving comments on the post. And you could tell by their comments on the post, they still didn't know what they were talking about. So their comments on the post were always like, no, we know. A lot of them were like, videographers should know story. And if that's your response, when I say videographers don't know marketing, they don't know funnels, they don't know direct response, and you're sitting there saying, yeah, we know story. Story is not any of those things. So it already proves to me you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know messaging. You don't know funnels. You don't know direct response because you think all of that is story, and it's not. So what was beautiful in that is when I said that and I was trying to attract the 7-figure course creators, they would all look at that and go, you know what, Brandon's right. It is more work. I do have to write the scripts. I do have to do all of this stuff. And then when I have a conversation with them, I would say the videographer probably created more work, does all these things, doesn't know marketing, doesn't know story. And they're like, yeah, I think you're right. And I go, look at my post. They all think story is that. That's what most of them think. So I was even using it as social proof when I get on the call with them, but I was intentionally using triggers to attract the right people and push the wrong people away. So you can do it both ways. You can use triggers to attract and push away, but you also have to be aware of triggers that you're not using them unintentionally on accident because it can have a really negative effect. I mean, it happens even nowadays. Like I'll do a post or something where I talk about how-to content's not the best way to build an audience online. And there's a bunch of people that teach YouTube and teach how-to content. And they're like, no, this is where all my clients come from and this and that and yada, yada, yada. Like YouTube is how I built my business, which is true. But it's like, well, how much bigger would you be if you didn't do that? But also there are people that use YouTube and do fine with it. But I do know the majority, like 95% of people that do all how-to content do not see the results they want. And I know that because usually when you're doing how-to content, stuff like that, it comes up in the search results. So you're using video SEO and like, let's just face the facts. Usually the only top 3 to 5 even get chosen. So when there's 1,000 videos on a one topic getting posted, only 5 of them are really going to be seen on every topic. So it's a very slow way to do it. But again, it's very triggering to people, but it's okay, because if you want to believe that how-to content is the best way to do it, I don't need you in my audience. And second of all, if how-to content is working for you, I also don't want to ruin that. So go do more of it. I don't care. Go do more of it. But for those of you that aren't doing it, this is the place to be. So again, I'm okay triggering people at the same time, but I'm making a conscious decision to be triggering around those sort of topics. Okay. Number 5, and the last and final thing to be aware of with people, obviously there's a lot more than this. This is just the 5 I wanted to talk about today, is people don't question their thinking or emotions enough. And this is a good thing to be aware of for you, because you have to understand you are not your emotions. You are not your thinking. Most people think they are. And most people think when they are emotional and thinking that they have clear thinking, and you don't. Emotions, in my opinion, emotions are the number one distortion in thinking. Your emotions will distort your thinking, distort your communication, which is why when you respond in an emotional state, if you're like me, you usually regret it later. You feel bad about it. Why? Because that wasn't really who you were. Your emotional state distorted who you are. It distorted who you think you are. And you had thinking and communication that wasn't you and wasn't effective. And so what people don't realize is that you have to question your thinking and you have to question your emotions. And a lot of the times what starts to happen is you have a certain thinking that's automated in your head, which then triggers an emotion. Again, it all happens automatically. You usually don't think about it. Then at that point, communication comes out, and that communication is distorted through your thinking and your emotions. And this is why it's okay to be emotional. That's what we are. We're emotional beings. But if you want effective communication, whether it's with your team, spouse, whoever, you typically don't want it to happen when you're in a heightened emotional state, both positive and negative, because sometimes when you're too happy, you start over promising, you let go of your boundaries. You're like, I can do that. Yeah, I would love to help you out, when you really can't. And then you regret it later. And then now you're in a different emotional state. And now you're like beating yourself up, or you're mad at the person, or whatever it may be. So you have to understand you aren't your thinking, your emotions, but a lot of that stuff is automated, which also is really important to know as you start to communicate and create your marketing. Okay. So you can talk about how they can avoid emotional states that they don't want, avoid different thoughts that they don't want. You can talk about different things like that. It's also another way to relate to people. So if you know that they're in different emotional states, you can use that as a connection point, and I do that sometimes too. Like, here's a story about when I thought, I was going to do a webinar that changed my life forever, and I made no sales. And I talk about my emotions, because I know that when you're going through a webinar and it didn't do any sales, there's some certain emotions attached to that thinking that you may have because of those emotions. And because I know that, I use it in my marketing to build relevancy and connection with people. So again, you have to be aware of your own thinking, your own emotions, so that you have clear thinking, clear communication. Get out of those states, communicate out of those states. But at the same time, if you understand the common, like I said at the beginning of this, is humans are the same for the most part. When you understand the emotions that they're going to be feeling during different experiences that you can help them with, you want to be using that in your marketing, because it is a connection point, which brings me to, what do humans want to hear? And this is going to be effective all the way around, no matter who you're communicating with. Humans generally want to be accepted. They want to be heard. They want to be respected. They want to be understood. They want their own authenticity, which means they want their own individuality. They don't want anyone to tell them what to do, what to think, how to be, what to believe. They want their own expression. And you should be allowed your own expression. And if anyone tries to take that from you, that shouldn't be something you're willing to deal with, right? You should have your own expression, your own authenticity. And that's what people want. So when you understand that, and you truly get that, and you understand, okay, my son, my wife, my friend, my coworker, they want to be accepted. They want to be heard. They want to be respected. They want to be understood. And they want their authenticity coming through. It alters and changes the way in which you communicate. So like even with someone on my team, when they have an idea and it's an idea I don't want to do, or I don't like, or it goes up against my authenticity, I will usually speak up about that. But I also speak with, okay, this person wants to be accepted. They want to be heard for their idea. They want to be respected for their idea. They do want to be understood. It completely changes the way in which I communicate with them. So if someone brings up an idea, I could say, I hear that. I've seen it work. It's actually a great idea. I respect that. You can even just say blatantly, I really respect that idea and respect you speaking up. I really do appreciate it. Here's my initial thought on it is da, 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 da. Does that make sense? Do you have anything else to add to that before we make a decision on what we want to do? And it's just a much better form of communication where it makes everyone feel respected, everyone feel heard, everyone feel accepted. And this is a really hard thing to do, especially when you get into those high emotional states, which can happen, or you are a victim of your own triggers. But when you understand this, and what I find is when I better understand myself, I better understand other people, is what I find. So when you go through these things, like the mind is naturally selfish, the ego, how you avoid hard things, your different triggers, questioning your thinking, your emotions, and knowing that you are not your emotions. You can change your thinking that changes your emotions. You start to realize this and you start to experience it firsthand. Now you will have a deeper understanding or knowing or mastery of how your audience goes through this too, which will completely change the way in which you communicate with them. So a lot of people will look at me and they'll go like, oh, Brian, you're great with messaging, blah, 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 whatever. Yeah, that's what I teach. But what they don't understand is they don't understand I'm a great communicator from a messaging perspective because I understand myself and continue to understand myself on a deeper level. I get to explore my triggers and my ego and my thinking and my emotions. I explore that. I try to have hard conversations. I try to listen more without any thinking coming up and truly hear what other people are saying. And that allows me to write, communicate, and coach at a deeper level than most people can, because I truly understand what it's like to get in the side of someone else's reality and perspective. Again, it's not always easy. I'm not a master of this all the time, especially when it's people close to me. But when it comes to audience and people on the internet that I've never seen before, but I know what they're trying to do, I understand how to communicate to them to make them feel heard and expected, respected, and accepted, and build huge amounts of relevancy to what they're going through. So the more you understand people, the more you understand yourself, the better communicator, marketer, and messaging, and the better you would be at messaging. So hopefully this episode was valuable. Hopefully it helps you understand yourself better. Hopefully it helps you understand your audience better and allows for better messaging. I'll see you on the next one. Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested. And thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.